Hi everybody, welcome back. In today's episode, we are going to fix something that I've already hated about last episode. Naturally, in the life of somebody who does software development and everything and programming, you spend all your time figuring out something. I spent so many hours trying to do this and refactor that code and worked on it. And then as soon as I posted the last video, I just decided, like, man, I saw this thing and I was like, wow, this is terrible. So I want to change one thing, and we're just going to get into it, which is the item spawning. I specifically said I wanted the spawn item to happen inside the player controller, and that's incorrect. I don't want to spawn the item inside the player controller. If I come here to this item, the spawn line, and then I come all the way down and I highlight all the if, else, everything statement, I can literally cut this out, come into the inventory component, and I can say void spawn item here. And if I just parameterize the spawn transform, so const f transform reference called spawn transform, and then give myself the inventory entry and the num items, so const f rpg inventory entry in 32 num items. If I do this from the inventory component and leave this as a public function, what I could do is just paste all this right here. And then I need to include the headers for these things. So we need to include streamable manager, we need to include asset manager, and we need to include item actor. And once we do those, we're inside the inventory component, so we can get rid of the inventory component. Do that, we just get item definition by tag. And now this function works exactly the same. And if I come out to the player controller, I can just take the inventory component and call spawn item, and it'll be the spawn transform, the entry, and the num items. And we're in the exact same place we were before, but now the inventory component can spawn an item. So anybody you give a player, anybody or anything you give an inventory component to, any actor you give an inventory component to, you can now use that actor to spawn an item, as long as you can give it a spawn transform and everything like that. So, and then the next thing I want to do for this video, and this might be the only other thing I do for this video, is we're going to create the passive ability to handle interaction. What I want to do is constantly trace every frame underneath your mouse cursor, and as soon as you highlight this frame onto something that can be interacted with, I want it to do something. I want it to do anything, and I want it to be unique up to whatever it is. I don't want to just interact does the exact same thing for every single thing. I want interact to be able to be different depending upon what thing I'm interacting with. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to close all of these, and then I'm going to come into the interfaces folder that I have here, and I'm going to add an Unreal class of an interface, and this will be interact interface. We'll go like this, and in the public section we're going to add two functions, and the first one is going to be void begin interact, and that's going to take as an a controller pointer, and we'll say interacting controller. And we have a u function, blueprint native events, blueprint callable. And the reason we're doing this is because this interact, you can give this now to, you can call interact from a player pawn, or you can call it from an AI, right? A controller can be cast to a player controller, the RPG player controller, or an AI controller. You can pass an AI controller through this function as well. So if you want your AI to begin interacting with something, you can, and then you can pass their AI controller through it, and you can check for it on the other end. So we'll leave it through that, and then we can say end interact. Native events, blueprint callable. Okay, we'll leave it like that. And so we know this blueprint native event, just because we have always implemented the blueprint native functions into the from the interfaces, we're going to implement this in blueprints in the item actor. We're going to use this in blueprints. So the blueprint native event is going to be a blueprint implementable event as well, right? That's what the native event means. It's an implementable event inside blueprints, but then there's also a native override that you can do if you want. But for the item actor itself, all we're going to do is publicly inherit from the interact interface. And that's all we have to do is inherit from that. And now we'll have that blueprint implementable event. So what are we going to do now? We have an interactable object. Well, again, I want to take the mouse cursor and I want to trace underneath the mouse cursor. And I need to do this every frame. So every time we hear the word every frame, trace, and all some of this other thing, especially on tick, the first thing I think of is a passive ability in gas, right? I can make an async ability task and I can run this trace on tick off the game thread and do this more performant. And if you do look through Lyra, if you look at Lyra's interaction ability, it's insane to me. I wanted to copy that, but it's just so much. I think it's so extra. I didn't want to even handle that. So for now, we're not even going to handle the degree that Lyra goes to, but we're going to copy the same idea because even Lyra runs an async ability task that checks for interactables. Now they don't do it every frame. They do it every like 0.1 seconds. They run a sphere radius check around the player for interactable objects. But since we're using our mouse, we need to know it every single frame. The frame that you highlight with that mouse, it needs to know. So we're going to come in the ability system, and the ability task, we're going to add an Unreal class of a uAbility task. And this will be ability task interact trace. Like this. And we're going to build the ability task. We don't need a delegate to do anything. We don't need a delegate at all, so we're not going to worry about that. But what we're going to do is we're going to start with a constructor, so uAbility task interface, and then we can implement this, and then we need this to tick. So be ticking task equals true. We need that to tick. And then we need our static factory function. So static uAbility task interact trace. It needs a u gameplay ability pointer called owning ability. And this gets a u function blueprint callable meta equals default to self owning ability hide pin equals owning ability blueprint internal use only equals true. And we have that. And then truthfully for this one, I'm already going to tell you, we don't need to do anything. We're not going to do anything when the object is created. We are going to handle some functions after the object has been created and everything is called on activate. So because I don't need to handle anything really when the object is created, I'm just going to return new ability task, uAbility task, passing through the owning ability. So we're just going to do that. But we need two virtual overrides. So I need a virtual void, and this is going to be activate, and then virtual void tick task. We can generate definitions for these. Now in tick task, what I want to do is I want to get the hit result underneath the mouse cursor and check for if I hit an actor underneath the mouse cursor. So I need the player controller, and I'm not going to get the player controller every frame. So we're going to cache a player controller. So I need a private section of a, T object pointer to an A player controller. And this will be player controller. Give it a U property, and then because we're doing a trace and we're looking for a hit result, I need an F hit result that we'll call interact trace hits. So because we need those, and then so how do I the player controller inside? There's a player controller is inside an ability task like this. If I say if uAbility system component pointer ASC equals ability system component dot get, because it's a weak object pointer inside of a task. So if I have the ASC, I can say that the player controller is right at the ASC, has the ability actor info, which is a shared pointer that has the player controller, which is a soft pointer or a weak pointer. So you have to call get. So then I will have the player controller who owns this ability. So I can say if not is valid player controller and task. But then we need to take the player controller and we're going to call get hit result under cursor. and that's going to go the trace channel. Just do visibility, whatever we can see we're going to check, and that's false. We're not going to trace complex. And then the hit result is the interact trace hit. We're going to do that. Now the thing is I only want to do this now that I have this hit result filled in right here, right? I've got this hit result filled in, and I've got this. I only want to do this for the interaction things, right? So what we can do to make sure that things are only going to interact with those things that we can interact with, what we can do is declare these variables called a tscript interface, and this will be of an iInteract interface that we forward declare, and then we will say this frame interact actor, and we'll copy this, and we'll say last frame interact actor. So now I have these. Well, let's just look at this. This frame interact actor. Let's look at a script interface. It's a pointer. It's a pointer to that interface through an object, right? So you can see it doesn't have anything other than these begin interact, end interact, get object, execute. So it's got some of these things, but it's not, it's got essentially only references to the interface itself. But the cool thing is the engine handles type conversion for you. So if we can take this, we could say interact trace hit dot get actor, and then the actor that it pulls out of the interact trace hit, if it inherits from the interactable interface, then this frame interact actor becomes valid. And if it does not, if you hit an actor and the actor does not implement the interface, then this is still considered null pointer because it's not an interact script interface. So we're going to say if this frame interact actor, so by saying that, we're not going to say is valid, right? We're just going to say if there is this frame interact actor, we're going to ask if this frame interact actor is not equal to the last frame interact actor. So if we're highlighting over somebody and this frame, it's new, and we say, oh, okay, so this frame, check it. And then, oh, it's not the same as it was last time. We could say this frame interact actor, you could do the pointer and say begin interact passing through the player controller, right? You could do that. However, in an interface, when you declare it with events, you can't use the function called directly begin interact. You have to use this as a static function. So you need to say iInteract interface with the static execute begin interact. And because you use the static, it needs the uObject pointer that will own this interface function, and then it also needs that controller. And then the object is this frame interact actor has get object. So we can just get the object that's out of this frame actor, and then we can pass through the player controller that it's holding. And then we can say if we need to ask about the last frame interact actor, right? So let's say there was one last frame. Well, we can say if last frame interact actor not equals this frame interact actor. So if the last one is the same one as this one, we don't want to do anything because, I mean, we're still just highlighting over the same one. We don't want to do anything. But if the last one is different than this one, that means we're no longer highlighting over the last one, right? Because this one is a new something, or it's nothing, and we've just stopped highlighting over something, over anything in general. So we could say iInteract interface execute end interact onto the last frame interact actor dot get object. We do that, and then we set the last frame actor to this frame interact actor right at the end. So then every frame it'll just check what the differences are between the two, and then it'll be called beginning interact or ending interact depending on what you're highlighting at this point. So we're gonna go back and we're gonna give ourselves this ability, and we're gonna grant it to ourselves as a passive ability and go through what we have to handle next. Okay, now that we're back in the editor, we can come into blueprints and the ability system, into abilities, and then we can say, we can make a new folder and we can call it passives. And if you want, you can even separate into here. We can say this is player passives, and you have enemy passives or other passives in different folders. But in a blueprint, we're gonna make an RPG gameplay ability. And inside this, we say GA interact trace. And in interact trace, we're just on event activate ability, we're going to interact trace. That's it, because all we need is an ability to house this object, right? So I'm going to put a breakpoint on here. However, oops, remove breakpoint. I need to toggle breakpoint. Okay, so I'm just going to put a breakpoint on interact trace, and then we're going to come back into the blueprints data, into the character class info. And this is a passive ability, right? So we're going to put a passive ability interact trace into the starting passives. And we're going to hit play, and we're going to see what happens. Okay, so server simulating, right? So we have the server has interact trace going, and then loads up, and then clients load up, and nothing, right? Nothing. Clients never activated this ability, never got it. And why is that? And that is because if we come to the ability system component, we'll close these. If we come back to the ability system component, when we add the character passive abilities, we say give ability and activate once. But if we come to the declaration or usages, in the third return, early returns, get out of here's, in the third one here, it says give ability and activate once called on ability on the client. Not allowed, right? So they just give that right there. So it's not allowed on the client to be a passive ability if we want to grant it that way. So how we have to do it for client passives kind of sucks a little bit, but the easiest way that I figured out how to do it is if we just come back to the gameplay ability itself. If we just give the gameplay ability itself a boolean that say b is client passive, set it equal to false, give it a u property, edit defaults only, and say category, custom values, and we can just leave it at multiplayer because we're going to want to know if the client passive is that. Then we can come back here and into the public section. Underneath our delegates, we can check out the virtual function. It's virtual void on rep activate abilities. On rep activate abilities is the rep notify for the get activatable abilities. This array, right? This T array of F gameplay ability specs, get activatable abilities, all the abilities you can use. That is a replicated using property in the ability system component, and they give you a virtual override for the rep notify for those activatable abilities. So if we override that, then what we could say is, well, we're going to look through our ability list. So we're going to make an ability list scope block and then make our loop for a non-const reference of an F gameplay ability spec. It's called spec through get activatable abilities. We're going to say if spec is active, we're going to continue and just go to the next one because we're looking for inactive passive abilities that we want to activate. So if it's already active, continue. Don't worry about it. And then we can say now that we're in 5.6, remember we need to do this off the instances. So we need the T array of the U gameplay ability pointer called instances, which is the spec.getAbility instances. And then we can ask ourselves if the last instance is a URPG gameplay ability, RPG ability by casting a URPG gameplay ability onto the instances.last. So if the newest one is that, we can take the RPG. We're going to ask one more time. Now we have the RPG ability. We're going to ask, is it a B is client passive? If that's the case, then we can try to activate the ability by the spec.handle. So we can do this. So only on the client's rep notifies, if this is an inactive client passive, it will try to activate the ability. So in here, we're going to do our class defaults. We need to make sure the instancing policy is instance per actor and not instance per execution. And we can literally leave the rest of this alone for now. We're going to save all, make sure everything's saved all, and then we're going to rebuild now that we have this handled. Okay, now that we're back in the editor, we are going to open this back up. We're going to say GA intertrace, so it's instance per actor. And now in the multiplayer tag is client passive. So now we're going to check this and says that is. But in order to do that right, in order for it to get replicated to the activatable abilities, it needs to be in the active abilities array. We can't give ability and activate once. So this interact trace is now going to be if you're on a listen server or if you're on a server authoritative ability, you can put it in the starting passives. But now we're going to have to give interact trace also to this in the default active abilities. And now if we hit play, I'll have the server simulating here, and then when my clients load up, now I have the client simulating interact trace, which will call it on the matching server, and then I have client 2 and matching server call. So we have that there. And then I'm going to put a pause in this, and we're going to break this up into the next video before we use this interact trace.